Hey everybody, thanks for joining me here today. Today we're going to be demonstrating a workflow from the raw file to a print-ready black and white image, and we're going to be using Camera Raw, Photoshop, and multiple Topaz programs, including DeNoise, Clarity, and black and white effects to produce the final image. This is the image that we're going to be working on here today, or this is the final image. The beginning image is very different. Let me pull that up for you, and the way that I'm going to do that is just by opening up the raw file and just starting the whole process. And that's really the way that I would start this process, is just by going File, Open, and finding the image in the raw format that I need. Here's the JPEG format just so you see it. And that's my raw image, and I'm just going to say Open, and it's going to pop open my Camera Raw program. Now, it did apply the settings that are saved in the file at this point because I've worked on this image before. So I'm just going to come over here to this drop-down menu and say Reset Camera Raw Defaults to get back to this original image. So what I do within Camera Raw is really just get my image ready to process. I kind of look at it like a developer for undeveloped film. So my image file that I'm bringing in, I haven't done anything with. It's all this raw information. And this is kind of the development stage. And really what I do in that stage is just get as much information as possible and get it to look as nice as possible without really doing any sort of heavy stylization or major editing, because I want to do that within my host program using Photoshop and Topaz. So one of the first steps that I have been taking recently, instead of starting off in my basic toolbar here, I tend to go over to my lens corrections and work with the corrections first. And the reason is usually when you enable your lens profile corrections, which I usually do, the histogram is going to change. So it's going to usually open up the corners of your image if there's some vignetting that's happening with the lens that you've used, and it'll take some of the distortion away that might have been there as well. But I know the lenses that I use tend to give some pretty heavy vignetting if I'm completely zoomed out. So this getting rid of the vignetting will actually open up those shadows and move the histogram to the right usually. So that's where I start, because if I work with all my tones and everything else, my tonal information, and then I get over here to the lens correction and open it up at that point, it might change my histogram a little bit too much. So if you don't like to use that enable lens profile corrections, no worries. You can start over here in the basic. Now, please know that anything I'm doing within Camera Raw can be applied in Lightroom or to the Lightroom adjustments as well. I had somebody write in saying, is this session even worth it for me if you're using Photoshop and Camera Raw? And Camera Raw and Lightroom are actually very similar. They're built on the same technology. So all of these adjustments you should be able to find within Lightroom, and you can apply those there. And also please note that this is subjective. This is just my personal workflow with this image, and I know that there are a ton of other steps that we could all be doing, so this is just an example workflow. All right, so let's start off with the basic. Sometimes I keep my white balance as shot, but I've been finding that the more I work with portraits, the more I want to take my temperature a little bit more warm. So I just like to take this over, push it towards the right until I start to see something that really looks nice on the skin. So that's really what I'm looking for in this particular image. So something like 5100, that looks like it's pretty good for me. The tint, it automatically applied a -2 correction. I don't really want that. I feel like I see a little bit of green, so I'm just going to move that maybe just right there at 0. So that works for me. And then I'm going to come down into my exposure and contrast control here. The exposure is the first thing that I work with. If I find that my histogram is really pushed over to the left or really pushed over to the right, I will correct that with my exposure and either move my histogram towards the right or towards the left. For this image, I'm just going to move it slightly to the right, maybe 0.15, just to kind of open up the whole histogram and push it a little to the right, get rid of some of those darker areas. Yeah, 0.15 looks like it works. Contrast I rarely use because I really like to take advantage of the highlights and white, shadows and black sliders below the contrast slider. So I usually just skip over that contrast slider and then work with my highlights and whites and shadows and blacks. So the first thing, what I'm looking for in this image is, again, just to kind of get all the information that I possibly can out of it while still producing a nice image to take in to then work with a little bit more. What I'm looking for in this contrast slider is I'm actually going to be paying a lot of attention up here to my histogram, making sure that there aren't any clipping warnings that are happening, and making sure that everything starts to look pretty balanced. Now I can see that there's a clipping warning for color up here, so I'll pay attention and make sure that I get rid of that with these adjustments. So for my highlights and whites, I usually will take those to the left, which will bring in more tone and information and detail, and then I'll usually take my shadows and blacks to the right, which will open up the shadows and blacks and bring in more detail. And that's just kind of protecting those areas a little bit more, especially if I plan on doing some heavier processing later on. Getting a nice file to start off with and getting as much information is great. So I'm just going to take this highlights level down, maybe about 0.1, or yeah, that works, 10. Then the whites, I'm going to jump down and just skip over the shadows right now and take those whites down as well, paying attention to his nose and the light that's coming in from the window there. Now I'm going to bring up my shadows and my blacks. Now I see that there's some clipping going on, so what I will do is a little trick. You might not know about it. If you press your Alt or Option key while you move these sliders, you're going to see the clipping pixels, so the areas that are clipped. So just to give you an idea, if I take my shadows all the way down and I have really blocked up my shadow information here, you see this clipping warning is going crazy here. If I hold down my Alt key and click on that slider adjustment, you'll see all those pixels that show up there are all clipped shadows. So as I take that right and move that to the right and open that up, you'll see a lot of that disappear. And I really love to do that because sometimes your eye won't necessarily see if there's a clipping going on, and sometimes the warning doesn't tell you if it's just very, very slight. So that can be really helpful and kind of a good indication of what's getting clipped. All right, I think I solved all my clipping problems with the shadows, so I'll leave my blacks alone and move on. Below all of my tonal adjustments here, we have clarity, vibrance, and saturation. I tend not to use clarity at all, especially if I'm on a portrait image. Clarity is really going to give you some localized contrast. It's beautiful on texture that you really want to show off. And you could take it to the left to decrease that texture, the clarity of texture, which is great for skin, but using Topaz clarity gives me a much broader scope than just this one slider, so that's the program that we're going to be getting into to really work with our clarity and contrast. The vibrance and saturation, I usually don't touch those too much unless I need to. For this image, I don't need to. So the next tab is the tone curve. I've pretty much fixed my histogram to where I want it to be, so I don't really have any adjustments here that I want to apply on the tone curve, so I'm just going to move on to my sharpening and noise reduction tab. That's going to be the third tab here. In the sharpening, by default, they're going to apply an amount that it usually looks pretty nice actually, but it applies it to the whole image. Now let's go ahead and scroll in to 50 or 100% to show you kind of how you can apply it just to a portion of the image and not to the whole image as it's doing now. I'm going to really take that amount and radius high so you can see a lot of that detail, and I'll even go in a little bit further here to 100%. And you can really see that being applied. It's nice on the eyelashes to get a little bit more detail, but look at the horrible thing that it's doing to the skin, and it's applying all that detail. Well, if you want to get pretty heavy sharpening on certain areas, but you have a lot of smooth areas in your image, this masking slider is your friend. I love this masking slider. If you press Alt, you click on it and move it to the right, you're going to start seeing a mask being applied to the smoother areas that have less detail, and only the areas that have sharp edges or very strong transitions of tone are going to be kept in white. And so these sharpening the sharpening that is being applied is only going to be applied to the white area of the mask and not the black. So if you work with portrait images a lot, or you work with landscape images that have really smooth skies, this masking tool or this masking slider is really valuable when it comes to this sharpening. Now I'm going to take some of the sharpening down anyways, but now I know that it's applying only to my sharp areas, which happens to be only in my eyelashes for this image. So I'm going to take this kind of back down to where it was default. Below that is our noise reduction area. The noise reduction is something that I will use if I have very subtle noise. This image, up here on the top of the tabs, you can see some of the basic image information. It was ISO 1600. So if we scroll in even more to this image, and I'm going to take that color noise reduction off, you can really see that this has quite a bit of noise in this image. And to really bring that point home, let's get into the shadows, and you can definitely see how noisy this image is. So I know when I look at noise that's this bad, I really choose not to handle it with the camera raw noise reduction. I like to handle it with DeNoise, which is a much stronger noise reduction program that's really focused in on high ISO noise and does a wonderful job with it. So that's what we're going to be using for this noise reduction. So one thing that I don't want to do, two things that I don't want to do. I don't want to apply any noise reduction if I'm going into DeNoise. If I know that I'm going into DeNoise, don't apply noise reduction in your camera raw processor. You're just going to make it harder for DeNoise to work properly. Another thing that you don't want to do is sharpen all over your image. That's why this masking slider is so important. If you want to sharpen within your Camera Raw or within Adobe Camera Raw, you really want to make sure that it's only sharpening on the areas that you want. Let me show you here, just to give you an example, what would happen if we didn't have this masking slider on. All that color noise and luma noise just became that much more difficult and strong-edged for DeNoise to try to get rid of. So if you're wanting to apply overall sharpening, don't do it in this step if you have heavy noise reduction. Or if you do want to apply selective sharpening, you can using this masking. And there we have it. All right, now I'm going to move on. Here in my HSL panel, I know I'm going into clarity, and we have an HSL panel there that I'd rather use at that stage, so I'm not going to worry about that. For this image, I don't need to do any split toning. In outdoor portraiture, I usually have a little bit of warmth in the highlights and a little bit of shadows in the, or a little bit of coolness in the shadows. I usually add a very small amount, but not for this image. So I'm going to move on. We've already worked with our lens corrections. I don't need to add any grain or vignetting to this image. And I don't need to work with my camera calibration. One thing that you should know about within Adobe Camera Raw is the presets. If you are bringing in a whole set of images and you're working on them at different times, you're not bringing them all in at the same time, setting a preset can be good. Another reason a preset is nice is because, let's say you're taking an outdoor portrait or, you know, at late afternoon, you can actually just name the preset, you know, outdoor portrait late afternoon, and then whenever you bring an image in that is at the same time and kind of has similar lighting, you might take away a lot of the steps we just went in if you just start with that preset. So here you can save a preset by just coming down and clicking on the icon in the bottom right, and it'll pull up and you can just name it whatever. So I'll do this Max Indoor 2, okay, and there we go. Now when you're ready to open your image, you can just open it on up, and it's going to pull into Photoshop, and that's where we start the next step. Now, just a little background on this image. I was just playing around with my camera, to be honest, and then I kind of saw this. I envisioned this. and But the very first shot, I was testing the light and testing my focus, and it ended up being the only shot where the focus wasn't completely off. I was playing around with my lens and apparently could not focus for the life of me that day. Plus, the focal range was just very, very small. So, it focused on his eyebrows versus the eyelashes, or on the tip of his nose versus the eyelashes. And I took about 5 shots, and this first one, where the composition was nowhere near what I envisioned, was the only one that really worked as far as focus went. And I thought, you know what, if I crop this and really play around with it, I can get what I need to. So that's what we're going to do first. I wouldn't necessarily suggest that you do your cropping, any significant cropping at the beginning of your workflow, but with this type of image, because we're going to be cropping in so significantly, and I know that that's what I want to do with the image, I'm going to do it here at the first step because it's going to eliminate a lot of this extra information that we don't need. So all these dark areas won't be part of my final image, and I don't want to sit there and go through the whole processing everything with it. So let's rotate the image first. So I'll take this, I'll just go up to image rotation, 90% counterclockwise. Now we're starting to get somewhere. And I'm going to just zoom in by pressing Control plus, get on in there, and come over to my crop tool over here on the left-hand side. I'm just going to click on that. And I want to keep my original ratio, which is 2:3, so that's great. I'll get my history to go away. And I'm just going to start pulling into the image, cropping, and kind of positioning where I want to go. Now, as I start to try to place this in a composition that I like, I'm noticing that this eyebrow is a little bit higher than the edge of this eyebrow. So I want to rotate it just a bit. I'm going to come down here to the corner, the lower right-hand corner, past the crop itself. When my arrow changes, I then know that I can just use my rotate tool by clicking and dragging that to the left or right. And so I'll just drag it a little to the left to kind of move it a little bit clockwise. Not too much, just enough where I feel like it's straight. So that feels a little bit more straight to me, so that's good. And I'm going to continue my cropping now. And I really want to get very close in, make it a little bit more artsy and less apparent what it is. His dad said it looked like a bird once we were finished with the first version. Kind of just using the rule of thirds here, placing his eyelashes, the area that I want focused on this upper third line there, and I'm happy here. Let's go ahead and say yes. One thing that I don't want to do is delete my cropped pixels, especially when I do this close-up of a crop. I want to keep the rest of my image information just in case I want to change it down the road, or do a little bit of a very minimal rotation. I don't want to crop any more out of it, so keeping my pixels is important for this particular crop. So just make sure, if that's something you want to do, just make sure that this delete cropped pixels option is not checked. Otherwise, when you crop, you'll lose all that information and you can't continue. Now, the other side of that is when you don't delete your cropped pixels and you keep all this image information like we're going to do, the processing of everything is kept. So it's going to process your whole image through every plugin that we use, through every step, so it takes a bit longer, and but that's just what we're going to do for this one. So I'm going to press check, and it'll crop for me, and now we have the composition that I want. Now the first thing that I'm going to do at this point is go into Topaz Clarity. You can really minimize the texture and kind of discoloration of skin, ruddiness of baby skin like we have here, very simply and realistically in Clarity, and I love working with that program first when it comes to images that have a lot of skin. So I'm just going to press Control J to get a copy of my layer. I'm going to name that layer Topaz Clarity. I'm going to open it up by going to Filter, Topaz Labs, Topaz Clarity. Okay, so now that we're in Topaz Clarity, I'm just going to come over here to my lower right-hand corner and press Reset All. Okay, the first thing that I want to do, because bringing in the whole image information, oh, actually, I completely forgot a step, and that's DeNoise. And I'm not sure if you saw, whenever I opened it up into Clarity and I saw all those blacks, I saw that all that crazy image noise. So yeah, DeNoise is first before Clarity, because Clarity is going to really sharpen up the noise in certain areas. So let's go to over here to the right-hand side, rename that DeNoise, and come to DeNoise and Topaz Labs. Okay, DeNoise will open up and it's going to zoom in on your image to about 200%. I like to work with my image at 100%, so I'm just going to come over here to this drop down in the upper right for my zoom level and come to 100%. Do not go below 200% when working with DeNoise. 50%, 25%, you are not going to see what the program is doing, and the display, I think, doesn't really show you exactly what's happening to your image. So 100% you're safe. 200% people do like to work in that, but I feel like it's too close, and when I get it to a point that I think is good at 200%, I then zoom out to 100 or 50% and it looks too soft. So I like to stick at 100%. Now, since we're working with a very cropped image, but we have all this extra information because we didn't delete those pixels, I only want to look at the area that is necessary. If you can find an area of the image that has a dark area, a light area, and a midtone, so a highlight, a shadow, and a midtone, leave it there the whole time. You don't need to move it because you're just looking at light and then the noise itself. So if I move it right here, I get my shadow area with his eyelash. The midtone is the skin, and then my highlight is on his nose over here on the left-hand side of the image. So I'm good to go right here. First thing that I like to do, now we're going to go through this manually. In my on my home computer, I have a ton of presets, and I highly suggest that you get presets going with this program. It's probably the most useful way of using presets in any of our programs, because there are many times that you use the exact same settings in a very similar light. So let's say you are a wedding photographer and you're in an indoor light setting, you're using a lens at f2.8 and you're constantly on an ISO of 1600 because you want a fast shutter speed, and you just know you'll have to deal with some image noise with that ISO. If you come in here and you set up a preset with that the first image that you have, then you can always apply that preset when you're using that same camera and lens profile and settings in a similar light. You're going to get the same results because the same type of camera noise will be applied to your image. So very useful to set up presets. But let's set up this first one by going through this manually. The best way to use DeNoise is to really know about these preview modes. So it starts off in the RGB preview mode, and your auto brightness preview is off. I always go to my Luma first, which is going to take away the color information. It's going to show me just my image noise, or it allows me to see my image noise much better. But usually I need to brighten up my preview so I can actually see the image noise really stand out. So I'm just going to click on strong. It's really going to brighten up the image and allow me to see the noise that much clearer. So now that I can see it, I'm going to come into my noise reduction and start with my overall strength. Now, when you're working with your overall strength, you're going to want to pay most attention to your mid-tone areas, not your shadows, not your highlights, because below the overall strength, you have the ability to adjust your shadows and highlights separately. So what you're looking for as you're taking your strength up is just a smoothing out of the image noise. It's just going to kind of start to disappear, flatten out. Those edges will start to smooth. And once it gets to a nice point where you don't feel like you're losing too much detail, but you have smoothed out that mid-tone noise, I like to stop there. So here we have about 0.11. Now if I look at my shadows, I see a little bit extra image noise, but I also know I don't have a ton of shadow information in this crop that I've created. So I'm just going to pay attention over here, maybe move my adjust shadow up a touch. Yeah, that helped with the lumen noise, just to kind of clear it up a little bit more. And usually with my highlights, I go down and actually bring some noise back, or the idea of noise, some of that texture, because the overall strength, it's going to apply to everything, and usually what you've applied to your midtones to get rid of that image noise is going to be too much for your highlights, and you've lost some detail. So I'm going to take my highlights down kind of arbitrarily, yeah, I saw a little bit of information and detail come back on the bridge of his nose, so that's good. Once I've done these top 3 sliders and I come to my adjust color red, I hop into my red preview mode, and that's going to show me my red color noise here. And just to give you an idea of what it was before we applied these top 3, here's before. So we had quite a bit of color noise on our red channel here, but we've taken away quite a bit as well with just the top 3 sliders. But now we can concentrate specifically on color noise and take that out. And what I look for in these channels, the red and the blue channel underneath, it's going to be just a flattening out of smooth areas. So I don't need it to be completely gone. I can still see some splotches and patterns, but if the majority of it is flat and I lose all these pinpoints, that's great. So I'm pretty happy here. I'm going to go into my blue preview mode now and work with my blue adjust color and look for the same thing, just flattening it out. Okay, that looks pretty good. The next slider is the clean color slider. For that, we need to be in our color preview mode. The color preview mode shows you the color information only. So it takes away that Luma information and only gives you the color information. So if I press before, you can see all of the color noise that was there in addition to the color information. And so far we've taken out a lot of it. But if you take a look at, let's say, his eyelashes up here, you still see a significant amount of kind of splotches. Now they're not nearly as evident as they are in the before, but there's still a different splotchiness going on here. That's what the clean color will help to smooth out, to really get your color information or your color noise to disappear. So this is just a last step for the color noise. I usually take it up to about 0.3 because I find that that is just a standard overall good setting for that particular one. And it really just smooths out the colors, crisps up the overall color lines, smooths out all of the muddiness that the color noise might have been creating, and then we're good. Then we have our correct black level slider. For that, you need to go back into your RGB preview mode and take that auto brighten preview off. And now we are, oh sorry, moving that around. Now we are back in this original image, and we can see our blacks. By default, it's at correct black level of 1, and that's going to add in some green to your image, or to your blacks, I'm sorry, because when you take out a lot of, let me actually go over here to the blacks so you can see. Yeah, over here on the top right, you can see that there's still a little bit of a magenta haze going on because there was a ton of color noise in there. And sometimes, even with using the clean color, it'll just flatten out the splotchiness, but it'll still leave a color haze. So if you take this up to about 1 or somewhere in between, it'll start to apply green and kind of balance that out. And it can be very subtle, and sometimes it's a little bit over the top. So, but that correct black level can just get your blacks back where they need to be. So now that I've done my noise reduction, I'm going to come down to my detail recovery, focusing on an area of my image that actually has detail. And the only area here is going to be our eyelashes, and I'm going to say recovered detail, paying attention to the eyelashes themselves, looking at my before and after, and making sure that I'm not losing any detail when it comes to my after. Here's before, here's after. I'm losing a touch of detail, but not much, so I'm just going to take that up to about 0.3, and I'm happy. Again, before and after. I love DeNoise. It's an amazing program that allows you to get rid of this really heavy noise and not even know that it was there because, I mean, the detail doesn't change. It's awesome. One thing about the detail recovery, this reduced blur slider, it's great for images that have a lot of texture, a lot of lines, a lot of detail going on. If you have an image that has a lot of sky, a lot of skin, a lot of smooth transitions, this reduced blur is not your friend. If you take it more than maybe 0.1, you'll start to introduce these little squiggly lines because it's trying to seek out edges, and it's trying to find those edges. And if you don't have a lot of edges, just don't use it. I find that the recover detail slider does plenty enough on its own. Next, though, this is very essential, at least in my workflow with DeNoise, adding grain back in. I've had a lot of people over the years say, why do you have this slider in there? All you're doing is reintroducing noise, because as you add grain back in, everyone knows you're basically just putting luminoise on your image. The difference is that it's very, very small. Let's scroll in a little bit more so you really see it. And it's it doesn't look like noise. It brings texture back to softened areas that allow for it to look like an image, a picture, versus kind of a plastic. I don't want him to look like a plastic doll necessarily. You know, I want him to still have some texture to that skin. So let's take that grain away. And it really just has a lot of flattened areas. The other thing that it can really do is if there are any residual little worms or artifacts that are in your areas that are soft like this, that addition of grain will balance everything out and kind of conceal any of those artifacts that might be there. Because sometimes when you do this heavy noise reduction, artifacts are just going to happen, and you have to find a way to conceal them in a way that works. And this adding grain does it in a very natural way and allows for your image to retain a realistic feel. Lastly, we have our debanding area, and that's only if you have really heavy banding noise. If you don't know what banding noise is, it looks like lines across your image, and it really starts to show up when you have super high ISO images or high ISO noise. So if you start to see these bands of noise, that's where this debanding really comes in. I don't see it in this image, so I'm not going to use it. If you want to know more about it, we do have it on our tutorials page on our YouTube channel. All right, so at this time in my workflow, I would say, okay, I'm really happy with this. Now, I actually took, in this lighting, I did a little photo shoot. So I know I'm going to at least edit 10 of them or so. And so I'm going to come over here to my left-hand side and click on this little, goodness gracious, I just forgot just click on the settings over here and press save. And it's going to pull up your save preset dialog box, and you can name the preset what you'd like. So I'll just say Max Indoor 2. The preset type, that's important to know about within this preset dialog box. You can either choose relative to noise estimate or absolute. Relative to noise estimate is going to allow you to use, to bring other images in, and it's going to detect the noise and try to get you the result that you see on the image here. It's trying to match it, but it knows that you're not bringing the same ISO, same camera, same sensor noise in. If you are bringing the same type of technical information in, so you're bringing in a bunch of images that are all ISO 1600 taken with a Canon 5D Mark II with the certain lens I was using, and they're all the same, come over here to the absolute, and that will apply the exact same settings in the exact same way to your images. So it really depends on how you want to use this preset information, but for this one I want to do absolute. We can say created by Nichole, camera, ISO 1600. All of this information is actually pretty important if you're saving your own presets. Image type is raw, and you can add a little description, so I can say, you know, maybe indoor window lighting only, something like that. Say OK, click. And now over here in my list, I have Max Indoor 2, and as I scroll over that, you see all of this preset information come up that I just entered, so you can actually see the camera information, all that good stuff. All right, I'm going to press OK and get back into Photoshop. And now we've done the two most technical programs, and we get to have fun with the rest. We're going to go into Clarity real quick and then get into black and white effects. Okay, so now let's scroll in and show you the before and after. Here's before. This is 100%. And after. Let's go a little bit more. Here's before and after. DeNoise is great for that high ISO noise. Okay, now let's make another copy of our layer over here by pressing Control J, and I'm going to go in and say clarity. Come over to filter, Topaz Labs, Topaz Clarity. And as I was saying when I went into the program at first, it's a great program for skin, especially if you want to maintain a lot of that real texture and you don't have a lot of skin cleaning to do, not huge blemishes. I don't have a lot of skin cleaning to do, mostly because a lot of it is out of focus. And what I do have is just some blotchiness on the cheeks and on the forehead, and that's really about it. So the first thing that I'm going to do is scroll into basically our crop that we're dealing with, because I don't want to look at all this other information. I don't care about it. All I care about is what I see here on my screen. And now I'm just going to start over on the right-hand side in the clarity with the dynamics control. And if you're not familiar with clarity, it is an amazing program. It is my #1 program at this point, and I know a lot of other Topaz enthusiasts, pros, all clarity is amazing because it's very powerful and the results are great. And it's very simple. It just breaks down your image into 4 different areas. You have your micro contrast, which is going to work on texture contrast, very, very tones that are very close to each other. So things like skin. If you increase that micro contrast, all of a sudden skin is going to become not very pretty. So what happens when you decrease it is that it really starts to lose some of that texture contrast and smooth out. But it does it not by blurring the skin or softening anything, it just minimizes the contrast. So it's a beautiful way of really evening out some skin. So here's before and after the micro contrast adjustment alone. So I really like that. All right, next we have our low contrast and our medium contrast, and that's going to be our mid-tone contrast. So the low contrast is going to be areas of tone that have a little bit more contrast in the image starting off within the micro contrast. So it still is going to feel like it's going to get some nice localized contrast, what I like to say, but it's not going to affect the very, very small texture contrast. So that's why it's really nice to have is you can increase small areas of contrast without actually increasing the very tiny areas of contrast and getting that grungy look. So I'm just going to take this up to about maybe 0.2. That works. And then we have our medium contrast. Medium contrast is the upper mid-tone, so you'll start to see more the darker areas and the lighter areas, your shadows and your highlights start to be worked on with this medium contrast. So I'm going to take that up to about 0.09, that should work. And then we have our high contrast. And high contrast is going to work on your blacks and your whites, and it'll leave the mid-tone areas alone. Now I can increase this or I can decrease it, and I find that I usually decrease it because by the time I've done my micro, low, and medium contrast, my blacks are starting to get a little too black and my whites are getting a little bit too white, so I will take this to the other side, opening up my blacks and my highlights and reducing the contrast just in those areas, but still maintaining contrast in all my other tonal ranges. So here's before, here's after. Now I can get in my tone level, which is something that I tend to usually do as well, especially if I've added a lot of mid-tone contrast. I will take my black levels up just a touch and my white levels down just a touch to, again, just kind of balance out those tones a little bit more. But again, I still have quite a bit of contrast coming through. Here's before, here's after. Next we have our masking module. I don't need to use the masking module. If you want to know about the masking module within Clarity, it's awesome, but I don't need it for this particular workflow, so I don't want to get into it. We don't really have the time. If you want to know more about it, please go check it out on our YouTube channel. It's youtube.com/Topaz Labs. Just type in Topaz Clarity, and you'll see a quick tip session on just the masks themselves. Some really cool tools in there. But for this workflow, we're going to go into the hue, saturation, and luminance, and it's just an HSL filter that breaks down your image into 8 different color ranges. And then we have an overall slider, a night slider down at the bottom as well. I'm not going to shift the hue at all, but I do want to play around with my saturation just a touch. I want to keep an eye out on the skin and kind of even it out even more using a little bit of my saturation and luminosity. So I notice that there's still some ruddiness, a little splotchiness going on, so I maybe want to reduce the reds just a touch. Same thing with the oranges, just kind of, I don't want to reduce the oranges as much actually. I'll reduce some of the yellows. I just see this one splotch right here that I'm trying to kind of get that saturation to go away. And I'm pretty happy here. Maybe the magenta down just a little bit. And then I'm going to go over to my luminance. And the luminance is actually the area that I tend to use the most in the HSL adjustment because you can just brighten up certain colors and darken certain colors and really drive your viewer's attention to where you want it to go. Another thing is this orange slider is awesome for skin. You can just come in and move it to the right and really brighten up some skin in a natural way. I'm going to brighten up this red as well, kind of even that out. So that's looking pretty good. And I'm pretty happy. So here's before and after. I would save my preset if I want to use this again, and then press OK, get back into Photoshop. I'm now going to take it into black and white effects. I knew going into this image that I wanted to have a final image that was black and white. I just really wanted the concentration to be on the form and lines and texture versus the color. I think the color, because of the close crop, is actually quite beautiful, but I really think the black and white will stand out. So I'm going to make another copy, Control J, name this layer Topaz Black and White Effects. And get into black and white effects. Now, if you're not familiar with black and white effects, definitely check out some of the upcoming sessions that we have on black and white effects. We are featuring it this month. And also check out some of the videos that are already on our archive page, again, youtube.com/Topaz Labs. We're only going to be going into a few modules here today, but it's really a very robust program. It has a ton of different areas for you. Over here on the left, you can really see that we have all different types of collections that you can simulate certain older processes or historical processes. It's a lot of fun to play with. But we're going to be over here on the right-hand side working manually today. So I'm going to press Reset All and get to my cropped area that I want to take a look at, and I'm going to get rid of all the rest of the image. So I really want to just focus in on this area. So because we're going to work manually, I'll just start over here on the conversion over here, and by default basic exposure is checked, but no settings are actually applied. So if you open that up, you'll see it's more basic exposure adjustments. You have your contrast, brightness, boost blacks, and boost whites. We've done quite a bit of our contrast work already within Camera Raw and Clarity. However, I do see that I want a little bit more contrast now that I've taken it to a monochrome image. I really want to drive people's attention to the light in the image itself and get a little bit more darkness out of my blacks as well. So I'm going to take my contrast up just a touch, not much. Maybe take the brightness up as well. My midtones over here are feeling quite gray, so I'm just going to take that brightness up and bring everything up a little bit. Okay, I like that. Now, the contrast I like overall, but my blacks still aren't necessarily standing out enough for me, but I don't want to increase the contrast in the brights. These boost blacks and boost whites will specifically target the dark tones or light tones, and it's really awesome to have within black and white effects. So I'm just going to boost my blacks closer to black As I do that, I see that it's not the correct, it's not going to be the right tool for me. I'm really looking over here on his right eye, our left viewing here on the left-hand side. That's the eye that I really want to start standing out, but because the light's hitting it, it's not being read as black or dark shadow within black and white effects. So I'm going to leave that at 0, and I'm going to use the selective local adjustment burn tool to actually get that deepening of tone that I want there. So at this point, I'm happy with my basic exposure, and I'm going to go into my adaptive exposure. The difference between the two is that the adaptive exposure works more on a localized or high dynamic range type of exposure adjustments. So if you just click it on, you'll start to see immediately that a different type of exposure is applied. It's actually the same adaptive exposure technology that Adjust uses, so if you're familiar with Adjust, this is very similar. Now, because I'm working with a portrait and skin, I'm going to come down here to this process details independently first and check that. Just so you know what that is, by default, the adaptive exposure connects the exposure and regions adjustments to the detail adjustments. So even if you don't add detail at all in the sliders themselves, by default, the adaptive exposure and regions does add texture detail, quite a bit of it. So if you don't like the detail but you still like the more balanced type of exposure adjustments, just come down here to this process details independently, click it, it's going to smooth out those images or the details, so it's not applying any detail adjustments. You still get a nice adaptive exposure adjustment. I'm going to take this down. I just want a little boost, not much. It can be quite aggressive sometimes. So maybe 0.12. Here's before and after. It's very subtle, but it's working for me. I like it. Before and after. All right. Now that I'm done with that, I will come down into my color filter. Color filter is great when working with skin for this, and so is color sensitivity, but today we're going to look at the color filter. I'm just going to check it on. By default, the more yellow hue at 0.5, very strong strength, is applied. I like to, when I come down to my color filter, just come up to my quick tools up here, and the very top row of quick tools are my actual color filter presets. So I can click on one of these and still keep all my other settings. It's only going to change my color filter. So this is just kind of giving you an idea of, you know, which one will look best on this image. And I usually, for skin tones, will go for more of a red or orange or yellow filter. And that's what it's going to do. It's going to brighten up those color ranges in a way that you can't just do through the color sensitivity sliders. So for this image, I'm going to go ahead and keep it, I think, all the way down at red. Let's go ahead and manually move it. Yeah, down at red, I like it the best. And it's way too strong right now, so I'm just going to take that down and apply just a bit. So here's before, here's after. Just brightens everything up, but in a way that is very different than using a brightening slider. Okay, now I'm going to come down to my local adjustments, because even after all of my conversion tools, which really works with the tone itself, I'm not happy with this eye over here, and I know that I want to work with the burn brush, and I also definitely want to add in some detail and work with my favorite tool within black and white effects, which is the detail brush. So within our local adjustment types, I'm just going to choose burn first. You can dodge burn, add color back in, smooth, which is basically kind of blurring. And then you can burn or add detail. So I'm going to use the burn brush first, and I'll leave the original overall strength at 0.2. That's fine. Take my brush size, pretty small, because I'm dealing with a small area. The opacity I'll take down to about 0.2. Hardness I'll leave down, and the edge aware I'm going to take off, basically, because there's a lot of different tones, and actually I'll leave it on. Let's see what it does with it on. When it's on, the crosshairs of the brush are going to determine what's affected, what color is affected or what tone. So as long as I keep the crosshairs of my brush on the darker tones of his eyelashes and eyebrow and don't go into the white, it's not going to affect the white. Now if I accidentally go over into the white, that's okay. I can press undo, or it's probably not going to be very noticeable at this opacity level, but I should be able to keep it fairly on those darker areas, and I think I did a fairly good job. Here's before and after. So I was trying to semi-match it. It looks a little fake now that it's a little bit darker than this one, I think, or it feels a little too dark. So I'm just going to take this overall strength slider down a touch, and now, so I didn't have to go backwards in my actual brush work, but now I feel like it's a nicer, even tone of eyelashes, and I'm not distracted by it being so light. Now I'm going to go to my detail brush and just brush over the eyelashes themselves to give a little extra detail to them. And I am not going to have edge aware for this. And I'm going to take my opacity levels up so you can really see some of the detail work that comes through. Do this quickly because we're running out of time. It's the same idea. We're just adding detail in, and I'm just trying to really highlight those eyelashes. Okay, so here's before and after. So I really made them stand out. It's a little strong for this, but I wanted you to really see that on your screen at home. All right, so now I'm going to I'm going to go into my finishing touches. The finishing touches is where you really get to add in all the tone and additional stuff into your process, your black and white process, that can really make it stand out. I love the silver and paper tone default preset of the warm tone, so I'm just going to use that here today. I love the quad tone as well, but sometimes you just want a nice warm tone image, and the standard default settings are quite lovely. The tone strength is a little too much for me at this point, so I'm going to take that down by about half, but let's show you the difference. Here's before, here's after. It just warms up the tone a little bit, and warms it up enough for me. It kind of reminds me of Ilford warm tone paper type of effect. So now that we're done with that, I'm just going to close that on up. And grain. Grain is really important to me, especially in these more kind of zoomed in black and whites. If there's not discernible grain, I like grain, I guess is what I'm saying. You don't have to add it in. You can have really, really smooth black and whites, but I tend to add in, even if it's very fine, some grain to really get the realistic touch of film if I'm able to. The film grain engine in here is amazing as well. Really play around with it if you're not familiar with it. But for this particular image, because it is really smooth, I don't want to add heavy grain, so I'm going to go into my grain library and maybe seek out a 100. I'll do a T-Max Pro 100. It's really pretty. Let me go into the image so you can see. Actually, I'll just increase my grain contrast as well. So you can see it's very fine grain. So when you don't have the contrast too up, it's very, very fine. You can't really tell that it's there, but it makes a huge difference, especially if you plan on printing. All right, so with that, I'm done with this particular image, and this is a little bit over the amount of time that I meant to spend, so we're at the end of the hour. I apologize about that, but I hope that you have seen a good raw to ready workflow. Very quickly, in the next minute or so, I'm going to go ahead and just show you how I would get this ready to print, because that's part of the whole process. So I'm going to press OK and get this into Photoshop. Now, if you were planning on posting online, if you weren't working in sRGB color space, then before saving your final sized image, you'd want to come into your edit mode and convert it to sRGB. And that is because most online, everything online basically is sRGB. And so if, let's say, your color settings are Adobe RGB, and you put that out on Facebook or a social sharing site, it's going to look, the colors are going to be a little bit more bland. And with the black and white, that can be very subtle or differences, but you worked really hard, to get this certain tone. You want that to show up. So that's a little tip if you're going online. Definitely convert it. If you're printing, what I would do at this point is flatten my image first. I'd save my layers, so I go File, Save As, Max Layers, and I save my PSD file. So I always have it there in this original size. And now I can come into my image size, make the size adjustments I want. If I'm printing, I'm going to leave it at a resolution of 300. And let's say I want to make it a 4 by 6 or 12 by 10. I can just type in, change this to inches, make this 12 by 8. And actually, I think I'd rather go for 6 by 4. I'll press OK, and it's going to resize my image. And I could have flattened it beforehand, but I always flatten. And then I go through the process of actually printing. And so now I have a 4 by 6 flattened image ready to print from from Photoshop. So I hope this gives you a good overall workflow for this particular image and how it was achieved. Let me go ahead and show you the before image one more time. Well, actually, I'll just go through the open. So this was the original image and our final image. Thank you so much for coming here today. Really appreciate your time and participation. Thanks again, and I hope you have a good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are. Take care.